My mother-in-law replaced our wedding vows with her own version when she thought no one was watching. "Just making sure everything's perfect for the ceremony," she whispered with a practiced smile. I thanked her and slipped away, retrieving our original vows from my bag while activating the hidden camera in my boutonniere. The evidence would be waiting on my USB drive after the reception. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I couldn't have imagined our special day would become a battleground. My name is Ryan Bennett, 34, a successful software developer from Seattle who built a thriving cybersecurity startup from scratch. I specialize in data protection systems, the kind of work that requires vigilance, attention to detail, and an instinct for detecting threats. Those same skills would ultimately save my marriage before it even began. To Elaine Cooper, my mother-in-law, what I did for a living was never impressive enough for her daughter. Such a shame Alexis is marrying someone who just plays with computers all day, she'd say at family gatherings, barely concealing her disappointment behind a brittle smile. Elaine was a retired federal judge, the kind of person who measured worth in prestigious connections and family legacy. Every dinner at the Cooper estate followed the same exhausting script. Elaine would interrogate me about my modest business, while her husband Richard, a prominent surgeon, would nod along sympathetically as though I were a charity case they'd graciously welcomed into their orbit. My fiancée Alexis would squeeze my hand under the table, her silent apology for her parents' behavior. I'd spent the previous week finalizing a major security contract with a Fortune 500 company, surviving on caffeine and determination. I was drained but ecstatic, both about the professional milestone and the fact that in 3 days I'd be marrying the love of my life. When Alexis reminded me about the rehearsal dinner, I pushed aside my exhaustion. "Just a few hours," she promised with that smile I could never refuse. I should have recognized the warning signs when Elaine cornered me at the church during the rehearsal. The way her eyes darted nervously before she offered to handle the paperwork and ceremony details. The slight tremor in her hands as she suggested, "You have enough on your plate with your little computer project." Something felt wrong, but I was too preoccupied with last-minute client requests to fully process what was happening. Alexis and I met 5 years ago at a charity gala where I was presenting on digital privacy. She was completing her PhD in international relations, brilliant and passionate about human rights law. We connected instantly. She understood my dedication to protecting people's digital lives, and I admired her commitment to justice on a global scale. We were partners in the truest sense, each respecting the other's expertise and ambition. Her parents were another story entirely. From our first meeting, Elaine made it unmistakably clear that I wasn't what she had envisioned for her only daughter. "How unexpected," she'd said when Alexis introduced me, her gaze flicking dismissively over my carefully chosen suit, as though I were wearing sweatpants to a state dinner. Richard was slightly warmer, but no less condescending, asking patronizing questions about computer stuff while checking his watch. For years, I attempted to win their approval. I'd bring expensive wine selected by a sommelier friend, share news about significant clients without breaking confidentiality agreements, dress immaculately for family functions. Nothing shifted their perception that I was merely a temporary distraction before Alexis came to her senses and chose someone from their approved social circle. Last Christmas, I overheard Elaine on the phone in the kitchen. "Alexis could have had Clayton Morgan, you know, partner at his father's firm by 32, family connections to the governor. Instead, she's with the tech boy who thinks firewalls are more important than building proper foundations." The way she paused before tech boy made it sound like an infectious disease. Richard was more direct after our engagement announcement. He pulled me aside under the pretense of showing me his wine collection. "Marriage isn't just about love, son," he said, swirling an expensive Cabernet in his glass. "It's about compatible backgrounds, shared expectations. The Cooper name carries obligations Alexis has been raised to fulfill. Are you prepared to meet those expectations?" His tone suggested he already knew the answer. I never shared these interactions with Alexis. She adored her parents despite their flaws, believing they would eventually recognize our happiness together. I didn't want to force her to choose sides, so I smiled through gritted teeth at family gatherings, complimented Elaine's impeccable taste, and discussed golf with Richard while keeping my true thoughts locked away. But there were warning signals I should have taken more seriously. How Elaine would accidentally exclude me from family photographs, the way she referred to me as Alexis's friend to her social circle even after our engagement, her habit of interrupting whenever I spoke about my business accomplishments, how she'd forget to include dietary restrictions I'd mentioned multiple times when planning family meals. I ignored these red flags, believing time would eventually bring acceptance. I convinced myself that after the wedding, once our union was official, they would finally see I wasn't going anywhere and adjust their behavior accordingly. Looking back, my optimism seems almost willfully naive. The Thursday before our Saturday wedding, I was wrapping up the final details of my major contract when Alexis called, voice tight with stress. "Mom says there's an issue with our ceremony, readings and vows. Something about the officiant requiring a different format. She's handling it, but could you review the changes tonight?" I promised I would, though a familiar sense of unease prickled at the back of my neck. Why would the officiant suddenly change requirements 2 days before the wedding? We'd finalized everything weeks ago. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. That evening, Alexis forwarded Elaine's email containing revised ceremony documents. As I scrolled through, my unease crystallized into cold certainty. These weren't minor formatting changes. She had completely rewritten our personally crafted vows. Our original promises about supporting each other's individual journeys and celebrating our separate passions had been replaced with traditional language about a wife's submission and a husband's duty to provide. References to our careers had vanished entirely, replaced with emphasis on family obligations and legacy. More disturbing still, she'd removed the reading from Alexis's late grandmother, a feminist academic whose independent spirit had deeply influenced my fiancé, and substituted a conservative passage about proper marital roles. It was as if Elaine was attempting to edit our actual relationship to match her preferred version. I called Alexis immediately. "Have you read what your mother sent?" I asked carefully. "Not yet. Conference call with Tokyo ran late. Is there a problem?" The exhaustion in her voice was evident. "Nothing I can't handle," I assured her, not wanting to add to her stress 48 hours before our wedding. "Get some sleep. I'll sort it out." After we hung up, I stared at the revised documents, anger building like a thunderstorm. This wasn't a misunderstanding or well-intentioned meddling. This was a deliberate attempt to undermine the foundation of our relationship. Elaine was trying to transform our equal partnership into the traditional marriage she envisioned, starting with the very words we would speak to begin our life together. Rather than confronting her immediately, I decided to be strategic. As a cybersecurity specialist, I knew the importance of having irrefutable evidence before making accusations. The next morning, I purchased a small camera disguised as a boutonniere. Decoration, nothing that would capture private moments, but enough to document any tampering with wedding materials. I also confided in Alexis's brother Marcus, the only Cooper family member who had welcomed me unreservedly. "I'm not surprised," he sighed after I explained the situation. "Mom did something similar at my wedding. Changed the reception seating chart to separate Vanessa from her unsuitable relatives. I've never told Alexis how bad it got because she idolizes Mom." "What should I do?" I asked, genuinely uncertain. Confronting Elaine directly could create drama that would ruin the wedding for Alexis. Marcus considered this. "Document everything, but keep it to yourself until after the honeymoon. Alexis deserves her dream wedding without family conflict overshadowing it. Afterwards, you can decide together how to address it." His advice made sense. I reversed Elaine's changes, returning our ceremony documents to their original form, and sent them directly to the officiant with a polite note explaining there had been a misunderstanding. I also made multiple backup copies stored in different locations, including a USB drive I kept with me at all times. The Friday rehearsal dinner proceeded with artificial pleasantness. Elaine was charm personified to our guests, though I noticed her tight expression when she saw the officiant chatting amiably with me. When she suggested I leave the ceremony materials with her to keep everything organized, I declined with a smile, explaining I had digital copies on my phone if needed. That night, alone in our apartment while Alexis stayed at her parents' house as per tradition, I received a text from an unknown number. "I worked with Richard at Boston General. Ask him about why he really left the hospital. Might explain the Cooper family obsession with appearances." Before I could respond, the number disconnected. The message was cryptic, but resonated with concerns I'd had about the Cooper family's fixation on public perception. I made a mental note to investigate later, but my primary focus remained protecting our ceremony from further interference. The morning of our wedding arrived with perfect Seattle weather, unusual sunshine breaking through the typical cloud cover. As I prepared at the hotel with my groomsmen, I received a call from Marcus. "Mom's at the church early. Said she needed to check on flower arrangements, but thought you should know." I thanked him and made an excuse to head to the church ahead of schedule. When I arrived, the wedding coordinator directed me to the bridal preparation room where the ceremony materials were stored. Sure enough, I found Elaine hunched over a folder containing our vows and readings, making rapid changes with a pen. "Problem with the materials?" I asked pleasantly from the doorway. She startled, nearly dropping her pen. "Ryan, you shouldn't be here yet, and you certainly shouldn't see Alexis's dress." She gestured to the garment bag hanging nearby. "Don't worry, I'm avoiding the dress. Just wanted to check that our ceremony readings are all set." I moved closer, noting how she subtly shifted to block the papers. "Just making sure everything's perfect for the ceremony," she whispered with that practiced smile I'd grown to distrust. "A few minor adjustments for clarity." "How thoughtful," I replied, matching her tone. "But Alexis and I are quite attached to our original wording. The officiant has the approved version." Her expression hardened momentarily before she recovered. "Of course, dear. I was only trying to help. Wedding day nerves. You understand?" I thanked her and waited until she left before examining the documents. As I suspected, she had reintroduced all the changes I'd reversed, plus additional modifications emphasizing family loyalty above all else. With my concealed camera recording, I carefully restored our original vows and readings, then secured them with the officiant directly. What I didn't do was confront Elaine immediately. This wasn't the time for a showdown that would devastate Alexis on what should be the happiest day of her life. Instead, I activated the backup plan I'd prepared. A trusted groomsman would remain, with the ceremony materials at all times, and I had multiple copies of the correct documents ready if needed. As the ceremony hour approached, guests filled the historic church. I stood at the altar, scanning the crowd. Richard sat stiffly in the front row, checking his expensive watch repeatedly. Beside the empty seat reserved for the mother of the bride, I noticed a distinguished older man whose face seemed vaguely familiar, though I couldn't place him. The processional music began, and Elaine appeared, walking gracefully to her seat. As she passed me, she whispered, "It's not too late to reconsider, you know. Divorce is so messy." Before I could process this astonishing statement, the bridal march started, and all attention turned to the back of the church. Alexis appeared on her father's arm, radiant in a gown that perfectly balanced traditional elegance with contemporary style, just like the woman herself. The sight of her momentarily washed away all concerns about her mother's machinations. Whatever challenges awaited us, we would face them together. The ceremony proceeded according to our original plan. When the time came for our personalized vows, I watched Elaine's face carefully. Her smile remained fixed, but her eyes hardened as Alexis spoke about pursuing our individual passions while building a life together. When I referenced supporting Alexis's ambitious career goals as she supported mine, Richard shifted uncomfortably. In his seat, after we were pronounced husband and wife, the reception began at an upscale venue overlooking Puget Sound. During the cocktail hour, I noticed the familiar-looking man approaching Richard. Their interaction appeared tense. Richard's face paled as the man spoke, and he quickly led him to a private corner. Marcus appeared at my elbow, following my gaze. "That's Dr. Harmon," he explained quietly. "Dad's former colleague from Boston. Surprised he's here. There was some kind of falling out years ago." Before I could inquire further, wedding coordinator signaled it was time for the formal entrance. The evening progressed with speeches, dinner, and dancing. To all appearances, it was a perfect celebration. Elaine performed her role as the gracious mother of the bride flawlessly, though I noticed she avoided me, except when others were watching. During a quiet moment, while Alexis was surrounded by college friends, I stepped onto the terrace for fresh air. Dr. Harmon was there, gazing out at the water. "Congratulations," he said, raising his champagne glass. "Alexis is an extraordinary young woman." "Thank you," I replied. "I don't believe we've been formally introduced." Ryan Bennett. James Harmon. I knew the Cooper family in Boston before they relocated here. He hesitated, then added, "I assume you received my text." "That was you?" I asked, suddenly alert. He nodded. "I saw the announcement in the alumni bulletin. Felt you should know what you're marrying into." He glanced through the windows to ensure we were alone. Richard didn't leave Boston General voluntarily. There were irregularities with research funding, patient billing discrepancies. Nothing could be conclusively proven. The Coopers have powerful connections, but his reputation was compromised. Elaine orchestrated their move to Seattle, reinvented their social standing. She's been crafting their perfect image ever since. Why tell me this?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "Because she nearly destroyed my daughter in the process," he replied grimly. "Rebecca dated Marcus in college. Elaine deemed her unsuitable. Wrong family background, too focused on career. The lengths she went to separate them." He trailed off, pain evident in his expression. "Rebecca transferred universities, needed therapy. When I confronted the Coopers, Richard leveraged hospital politics to sideline me professionally. I processed this information, pieces clicking into place. Does Alexis know any of this?" He shook his head. "The Cooper children only know the sanitized version their parents present. Elaine is exceptionally skilled at controlling narratives." Before we could continue, Elaine herself appeared at the terrace doorway. "Ryan, dear, they're preparing for the cake cutting." Her voice was honeyed, but her eyes darted suspiciously between us. "Dr. Harmon was just sharing some fascinating Boston stories," I said pleasantly. "How nostalgic," she replied with a tight smile, "though I'm sure much has changed in the 15 years since we left." "Some things never change, Elaine. Harmon replied quietly, meeting her gaze directly. Something unspoken passed between them before Elaine turned to me. "Do come inside, Ryan. Your bride is waiting." As I rejoined the reception, my mind was racing. The Cooper family facade was cracking, revealing glimpses of deeply troubling patterns. The wedding vows incident wasn't an isolated impulse, but part of a calculated approach to maintaining control and appearances at any cost. Alexis glowed with happiness as we cut the cake together, completely unaware of the undercurrents swirling around us. I pushed aside my concerns, determined that nothing would taint this day for her. There would be time enough after our honeymoon to decide how to address what I'd learned. What I didn't realize was how quickly matters would escalate. As the reception wound down and guests began departing, I stepped into the venue's office to retrieve our marriage license and other important documents from the safe where I'd stored them. When I opened the envelope containing our license, I immediately noticed something wrong. Certain fields had been altered, with different ink clearly visible. Upon closer inspection, I discovered that someone had modified the document, changing my information in subtle but potentially problematic ways. My profession had been altered from CEO Bennett Security Systems to simply technical employee. My address had been changed to show I lived with my parents rather than in the downtown condo Alexis and I had purchased together. These might seem like minor changes, but to someone with my background in document security, the implications were serious. Marriage licenses are legal documents. Tampering with them could potentially create complications with our marriage's legal standing. Moreover, the changes painted me as less established and successful than I actually was, exactly the narrative Elaine had been pushing all along. The boutonniere camera was still active, documenting my discovery. I carefully photographed the altered document, then placed it in a separate envelope inside my jacket pocket. I would need to contact the county clerk's office immediately after our honeymoon to file the correct information. When I returned to the reception, Elaine was speaking intently with the wedding photographer. As I approached, I overheard her saying, "Focus on the Cooper family group shots. The groom's side isn't as extensive, so we'll need fewer of those." "Actually," I interrupted smoothly, "we've prepared a shot list that gives equal coverage to both families. My grandparents traveled from across the country to be here." The photographer looked relieved at my intervention. "Yes, Mr. Bennett. I have the list you and Mrs. Bennett approved." Elaine's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Just trying to be efficient with everyone's time. The Cooper family connections will be important for the society announcement." "We've decided not to do a society announcement," I stated firmly. Alexis and I agreed we preferred privacy over publicity. This was clearly news to Elaine, whose composure slipped momentarily. "That's absurd. The Seattle Times Society page has featured Cooper family weddings for 2 generations. I've already contacted the editor, without consulting the actual couple getting married." I kept my voice calm but resolute. "Please cancel it, Elaine. Alexis and I are private people. We don't want that kind of attention." "We'll discuss this later," she replied tersely as another guest approached. Her dismissive tone suggested she had no intention of respecting our wishes. As the evening concluded and we prepared to leave for our hotel before tomorrow's early flight to Bali, Alexis's father approached me while she was saying goodnight to college friends. "A word of advice," Richard said quietly, clapping a hand on my shoulder with avuncular pretense. "Family harmony requires flexibility. Elaine has certain expectations about how the Cooper legacy continues. Meeting those expectations would make your marriage much smoother." His tone carried an unmistakable warning beneath the paternal facade. "I appreciate your concern," I replied carefully, "but Alexis and I will determine the course of our own marriage." His expression hardened. "You're entering an established Family with traditions that predate you considerably. Challenging those traditions has consequences. With that cryptic statement, he rejoined his wife, who was watching our interaction with calculating eyes. As Alexis and I departed amid sparklers and well-wishes, the weight of the USB drive in my pocket felt like a shield against the Cooper family's manipulations. The evidence it contained, the tampered vows, the altered marriage license, the recorded conversations, would need to be addressed, but not tonight. Tonight belonged to us alone. In our hotel suite, as Alexis drifted to sleep beside me, I realized the depth of what we were facing. This wasn't just about a controlling mother-in-law with boundary issues. The Cooper family operated like a carefully orchestrated system designed to preserve their particular vision of success and status, eliminating variables they couldn't control. I had married the woman I loved beyond measure, but I had also married into a family dynamic that threatened the very foundation of our relationship. The strategies that had built my successful business, vigilance, preparation, and strategic thinking, would now be essential in protecting our marriage. Tomorrow we would fly to Bali for 2 weeks of newlywed bliss, temporarily beyond Elaine's reach. But eventually, we would return to Seattle and the complex reality awaiting us. I gazed at Alexis's peaceful, sleeping face, recommitting to the vows we had exchanged, our real vows, not the version her mother had attempted to impose. Whatever challenges the Cooper family presented, we would face them together. With truth as our foundation and evidence to support it, we could establish healthy boundaries without destroying Alexis's relationship with her family. It wouldn't be easy, but nothing truly worthwhile ever is. As I finally drifted towards sleep, I found myself grateful for my professional paranoia and the hidden camera that had documented the day's events. Sometimes the skills that make you successful in business prove equally valuable in personal life. In this case, my instinct for protection and preparation might have saved our marriage before it truly began. The weeks following our honeymoon in Bali were deceptively peaceful. Alexis and I returned to Seattle tanned and rejuvenated, settling into our downtown condo with the optimism of newlyweds. We arranged our wedding photos on bookshelves, unpacked gifts, and established new routines. As husband and wife, for a brief moment, I allowed myself to believe that perhaps the wedding day incidents had been isolated expressions of Elaine's anxiety, rather than indicators of a deeper pattern. That illusion shattered on a rainy Sunday 3 weeks after our return. We'd been invited to brunch at the Cooper estate, an imposing colonial revival on Mercer Island with manicured gardens and a view of Lake Washington that featured prominently in architectural magazines. Just family, Elaine had specified when calling Alexis, though her definition of family proved surprisingly elastic. When we arrived, the sprawling dining room was already occupied by a dozen people, including an unfamiliar man about my age seated prominently at Richard's right hand. Alexis tensed beside me as we entered. "That's Clayton Morgan," she whispered, recognition and confusion mingling in her voice. The name immediately registered. Clayton Morgan, the man Elaine had mentioned during her Christmas phone conversation. The partner at his father's firm with connections to the governor whom Alexis could have had, instead of me. My cybersecurity instincts fired warning signals as clearly as any network intrusion detection system. "Alexis!" Clayton stood, his practiced smile revealing perfect veneers as he approached. "It's been, 6 years? You look stunning as ever." He embraced my wife with familiar ease before turning to me with a politician's handshake. "And you must be the tech genius who swept her off her feet. Elaine's told me all about your startup." The slight hesitation before startup conveyed exactly what Elaine had told him, that my successful company was a hobby business barely worth mentioning. Before I could correct this impression, Elaine glided into the conversation. Clayton's firm is handling some estate planning for us, she explained smoothly. I thought it would be lovely to reconnect him with old friends while he's helping family. The emphasis on family and old friends established a clear categorization. Clayton belonged to their inner circle. I remained an outsider. Throughout brunch, Elaine orchestrated a masterclass in subtle undermining. She directed conversation toward topics highlighting Clayton's accomplishments while creating opportunities to frame my work as quaint or temporary. Ryan's little company is doing quite well, though of course nothing with the stability of established legal practice, she remarked while passing the mimosas. We're just relieved Alexis can continue her policy work at the foundation without financial concerns. The implication was clear. My business success was a lucky break that might dissolve at any moment, leaving Alexis to carry us financially. The reality that my cybersecurity firm had secured contracts with 3 Fortune 500 companies and was currently negotiating government contracts remained unacknowledged. What struck me most, however, was watching Alexis navigate these dynamics. My brilliant, confident wife became incrementally quieter in her mother's presence, deferring to Elaine's opinions and laughing politely at thinly veiled jabs directed my way. It wasn't submission exactly, but a learned response to minimizing conflict, as though she'd calculated long ago that challenging her mother's narrative only escalated tensions. After brunch, Richard invited the men to his study for scotch, a ritual that struck me as anachronistic but revealed strategic purpose. As Clayton launched into a discussion about vacation properties in the San Juan Islands, Richard casually mentioned, Elaine and I have been considering putting the Orcas Island Cottage in a trust for Alexis and future grandchildren. Family legacy planning, ensuring proper management of Cooper assets. The pointed exclusion of my name in this family legacy planning wasn't subtle. Neither was Clayton's immediate offer to draw up preliminary documents while explaining the tax benefits of various trust structures. I remained silent, observing the performance while nursing my scotch. This wasn't the moment for confrontation. I needed to understand the full scope of what we were facing. On the drive home, Alexis was unusually quiet, staring out at the rain-slicked streets. Finally, she spoke. I'm sorry about Clayton being there. Mom didn't mention he'd be joining. Did you date him? I asked, keeping my tone conversational. Rather than accusatory, she sighed. Briefly in law school, it was nothing serious. We attended some family events together. He was my mother's ideal match. Right schools, right family, right career path. And wrong for you? I prompted gently. A small smile. Completely wrong for me, self-absorbed, conventional, boring. She reached for my hand. Everything you're not. I squeezed her fingers, encouraged by her clarity, yet troubled by the broader pattern emerging. Your mother seems intent on keeping him in our orbit. That's just Mom being Mom. She maintains relationships with everyone. It's how she built her reputation on the bench. Connections matter to her. Alexis's rationalization was practiced, the response of someone who had long ago developed explanations for troubling behavior. I decided to test the waters. The trust Richard mentioned, that seemed like a pointed exclusion. Alexis tensed slightly. Dad's always been obsessed with preserving family assets. It doesn't mean anything personal. It felt personal, I countered gently, particularly with Clayton there offering legal services for a trust that deliberately bypasses your husband. You're reading too much into it, she insisted, but the slight waver in her voice suggested otherwise. Let's not let them get to us. This is our life, not theirs. I nodded, letting the subject drop temporarily. The USB drive with wedding evidence remained secured in my home office safe, untouched since our return. I'd hoped we wouldn't need it, that the Coopers would respect our marriage once it was formalized. Instead, it seemed they were simply adjusting their approach, finding new avenues to undermine our partnership while maintaining plausible deniability. The following week brought another development. Alexis came home from her foundation job looking troubled, dropping her briefcase with unusual carelessness. "Everything okay?" I asked, setting aside my laptop where I'd been reviewing security protocols for a new client. "The foundation board met today," she said slowly. "They've created a new position, Director of International Relations, basically overseeing everything I've been building for the past 3 years. "That sounds like a promotion," I ventured cautiously, noting her expression. "It would be, except they've already selected someone for the role." She exhaled sharply. "Clayton Morgan will be supervising my department effective next month." The calculated precision of this move took my breath away. Elaine sat on the Foundation's board, a fact she frequently mentioned at social functions. The coincidence of Clayton suddenly appearing in Seattle, at our family brunch, and now in a position directly above my wife, professionally strained credulity. "This isn't coincidence," I said finally. "Your mother's orchestrating this." Alexis paced our living room, conflicted. "That's a serious accusation, Ryan. Mom recommended Clayton for the position, yes, but his qualifications are legitimate. Harvard Law, 5 years with international NGOs. And being her preferred choice for her daughter," I added quietly, "creating daily contact between you two while simultaneously establishing a power dynamic where he's your superior." "You think she's still trying to matchmake? I'm married?" Alexis's incredulity was genuine, which concerned me more than anger would have. She truly couldn't see the pattern that seemed blindingly obvious to me. "I think she's creating conditions to stress our marriage while positioning alternatives," I replied carefully. "It's not about matchmaking exactly, it's about control and preferred outcomes." Alexis sank onto our sofa, visibly processing. That would be incredibly manipulative." "Yes," I agreed simply, "it would be." The moment hung between us, me waiting to see if she was ready to acknowledge the darker reality of her mother's behavior. Alexis caught between loyalty to family and mounting evidence that something wasn't right. "I need time to think," she said finally, retreating to our bedroom. That night, I made a decision. While Alexis slept, I accessed the USB drive, reviewing the wedding day footage and subsequent evidence I'd gathered. The pattern was unmistakable, not isolated incidents, but a coordinated campaign. If I presented everything at once, however, it might overwhelm Alexis, forcing her to choose sides before she was ready. Instead, I needed a measured approach that respected her relationship with her parents while protecting our marriage. The next morning over coffee, I broached the subject differently. "I respect your parents, Alexis. They've accomplished incredible things and raised a remarkable daughter. But I'm concerned about boundaries and influence as we build our life together." She nodded cautiously. "What specifically?" "Let's start with Clayton's sudden prominence in our lives. If his presence makes you uncomfortable in any way, professionally or personally, that's something we should address directly, regardless of how he got the position." This approach, focusing on solutions rather than accusations, visibly relieved her. "I am uncomfortable having him as my supervisor. The history, the connection to my parents. It creates complications. Would you consider looking at other opportunities? Your expertise in international policy is valuable beyond the foundation." She hesitated. "I've built so much there. Leaving feels like surrender." "It's not surrender to choose your own path," I countered gently. "It's self-determination." This reframing resonated with her. "I have been contacted by the UN Development Program about a consulting role. The travel schedule would be intense, but the work aligns perfectly with my research interests." "That sounds incredible," I encouraged. "Worth exploring." She smiled, the first genuine smile since the board announcement. Yes, I'll reach out to them today. This small victory, Alexis, considering options outside her mother's sphere of influence, felt significant. We were addressing symptoms, rather than causes, but it was progress. The conversation had opened a door to more difficult discussions ahead. 2 days later, Alexis received a formal invitation to a strategy lunch with Clayton to discuss departmental transitions. When she mentioned considering other professional opportunities, Elaine called within hours, a timing that confirmed my suspicions about information flow between Clayton and the Coopers. "Darling, Clayton mentioned you're feeling unsettled about the reorganization," Elaine began, when Alexis put the call on speaker in our kitchen. "That's perfectly natural, but leaving the foundation would be impulsive. The Cooper name carries weight there. We've invested considerably in building that institutional relationship." The phrasing was revealing. The Cooper name, we've invested, institutional relationship. Alexis wasn't being viewed as an independent professional, but as an extension of family brand management. "I'm exploring options that align with my expertise," Alexis replied carefully. "The UN position would significantly expand my impact on refugee policy." "The UN is notoriously political and unstable," Elaine dismissed, "whereas the Foundation offers security and local prominence. Think practically, Alexis. Family connections have positioned you advantageously." After the call ended, Alexis looked troubled. "She's never discouraged my professional growth before. It doesn't make sense." "It makes sense if control is the priority," I suggested. "The Foundation keeps you in Seattle under supervision, within networks she manages. The UN would make you more independent, internationally focused, beyond her immediate influence." Alexis was quiet, considering this perspective. "I've always viewed Mom as my biggest advocate." "She is, in her way," I acknowledged. "But advocacy filtered through her vision of what your life should be, not necessarily what you want it to be." Something shifted in Alexis's expression, the beginning of recognition, of seeing familiar behaviors through a new lens. She didn't verbalize this revelation, but I sensed a barrier had begun to crack. The following week brought escalation on multiple fronts. Alexis interviewed with the UN development team via video conference, impressing them enough to receive a preliminary offer. Meanwhile, Clayton increased his presence at the Foundation, scheduling daily meetings with Alexis and looping her parents into professional discussions where they had no official role. Then came the dinner invitation. Richard called personally. Unusual, as Elaine typically managed social calendars, requesting our presence for an important family discussion that weekend. His tone carried an undertone of authority that rubbed against my instinctive resistance to manipulation. "We should hear them out," Alexis said, after I expressed reservations. "Setting boundaries doesn't mean cutting communication." I agreed, though I took precautions. The boutonniere camera had proven valuable once. A discreet recording device in my jacket pocket might serve similar purpose. Washington was a two-party consent state for recordings, so I couldn't legally record private conversations without disclosure, but documentation for personal review remained an option. The Cooper estate felt particularly imposing that Saturday evening, rain streaking the massive windows overlooking charcoal-colored waters. Richard greeted us with unusual warmth, while Elaine was notably absent until cocktails had been served in the formal living room. "She's making calls regarding the hospital wing dedication," Richard explained vaguely. "Board responsibilities never end." When she finally appeared, Elaine's composure was immaculate as always, but something in her eyes registered as calculated determination. "Alexis, darling. Ryan." Her acknowledgement of me felt perfunctory. "Shall we discuss matters over dinner?" The important family discussion became clear during the first course. a seafood bisque that Elaine barely touched while outlining what amounted to a comprehensive life plan for Alexis and, by extension, me. The Foundation Board is concerned about continuity with the international programs you've developed, she began, addressing Alexis directly while practically ignoring my presence. They're prepared to offer significant incentives for a 5-year commitment, expanded budget, dedicated staff, the title of Cooper Center for International Policy. The naked ambition of naming an institutional division after Alexis's family revealed the stakes. This wasn't just about professional development, but legacy building, with Alexis as the vehicle for Cooper immortalization in Seattle's philanthropic landscape. That's quite an offer, Alexis replied neutrally, though as I mentioned, I'm exploring international opportunities that would leverage my expertise more directly. Richard entered the conversation, his surgeon's precision evident. In the carefully constructed argument, we've given considerable thought to your career trajectory, Alexis. The Foundation creates local impact while maintaining your connection to important networks here. International roles, while prestigious sounding, often prove isolating and ultimately career-limiting. We're also concerned about practical considerations, Elaine added smoothly. Travel demands of UN consulting would place considerable strain on a new marriage. Many promising relationships falter under such pressures. The concern for our marriage would have seemed thoughtful, if not for the pointed look she directed my way, an unspoken suggestion that I would either restrict Alexis's career advancement or be unable to sustain a relationship with a frequently traveling, successful wife. I maintained strategic silence, observing the dynamic while Alexis responded with increasing confidence. Ryan and I make decisions together about our careers and priorities. We support each other's professional growth. Of course you do. Elaine agreed with artificial warmth, which is why we've considered Ryan's situation as well. This unexpected pivot captured my full attention. Clayton's father sits on several corporate boards, she continued. Technology companies looking for security expertise at the executive level, better compensation, stability, equity options, a significant step up from consulting work. The audacity was breathtaking, not just managing Alexis's career, but attempting to redirect mine into channels they controlled or influenced. More concerning was the implication that they'd been discussing my professional life with Clayton's family, leveraging connections to create golden handcuffs that would bind us more tightly to their sphere of influence. My firm is doing extremely well, I replied evenly. We're expanding into government contracting next quarter and opening a second office in Austin. Richard waved this away dismissively. Small business is always vulnerable to market fluctuations. Corporate security directorships provide stability, connections, retirement planning, considerations that become more important when starting a family. The reference to family planning wasn't subtle. Throughout dinner, they continued weaving an elaborate tapestry of concern, opportunity, and subtle pressure, always framed as loving guidance rather than manipulation. To someone without experience identifying social engineering tactics, it might have seemed like genuine parental support. My background in security made the techniques transparent, creating dependency, offering controlled choices, establishing surveillance through trusted connections, isolating targets from independent decision-making. After dessert, Richard invited me to his study, separating me from Alexis, another classic tactic. Once the heavy door closed behind us, his demeanor shifted subtly from cordial to authoritative. Ryan, I appreciate your enthusiasm for building your business, he began, pouring amber liquid into crystal tumblers. But there are realities about the Cooper family you may not fully grasp. I'm listening, I replied, accepting the drink without consuming it. Generations of careful decisions have created our position in this community. Marriages, careers, associations, nothing happened by accident. He settled into a leather chair with patrician confidence. Alexis was raised with certain expectations. Her fulfilling those expectations ensures family resources continue supporting her ambitions. The implied threat was clear. Defy Cooper. Family preferences. Lose Cooper family backing. Financial leverage as a control mechanism. Are you suggesting your support for Alexis is conditional on her career choices? I asked directly. Richard's expression hardened momentarily before resuming its practiced neutrality. I'm suggesting that family harmony requires alignment of interests. The foundation position, your potential corporate role, these create a stable structure for the next phase of Cooper family development. With all due respect, sir, Alexis and I determine the structure of our life together. External pressure, however well-intentioned, isn't welcome. He studied me with clinical detachment. You speak as though decisions exist in isolation. Everything has consequences, Ryan. Choosing paths against experienced guidance often leads to unnecessary difficulties. The conversation continued, circling. These themes, vague warnings wrapped in paternal concern, opportunities contingent on compliance with unstated expectations. When we rejoined the women in the living room, I found Alexis engaged in a similarly tense conversation with her mother about practical considerations for housing once children enter the picture. Another presumptuous intrusion into our most personal decisions. On the drive home, rain hammering our windshield matched the turbulence of our thoughts. Alexis broke the silence first. They've never been that explicit about their expectations before. What changed? I asked. She considered this. We got married. I'm seriously considering the UN role. We're making independent decisions, and they're losing influence. The self-awareness in her observations sparked hope. Does that bother you? It should feel suffocating, she admitted. Instead, it makes me sad. I've always wanted their approval, but not at the cost of my autonomy. Your mother mentioned children several times, I noted carefully. Alexis tensed. She's been increasingly focused on grandchildren since Marcus and Vanessa announced they're waiting another year. The Cooper legacy needs continuation, apparently. Our family planning timeline is our decision, I emphasized gently. Of course it is, she agreed quickly, perhaps too quickly. Later that night, I reviewed notes from the evening's conversations, identifying patterns of manipulation and control. The Coopers operated with remarkable consistency. Identify life domains important to Alexis, create structures limiting independence. Within those domains, present predetermined options as free choices, leverage emotional and financial ties to ensure compliance. It was sophisticated and, for someone raised within the system, nearly invisible. Alexis had begun recognizing the pattern, but decades of conditioning couldn't be undone through single realizations. Her relationship with her parents was complex, genuine love intertwined with unhealthy control dynamics. The USB drive with wedding evidence remained unused. The time wasn't right for full disclosure that might force Alexis to make absolute judgments about her parents. Instead, we needed incremental boundaries, consistent reinforcement of our partnership, and space for Alexis to recognize manipulation without defensive denial. The opportunity to establish such boundaries arrived unexpectedly the following Tuesday. Alexis received an email from her mother with subject line, Foundation Contract, Final Review. The attached document outlined the promised 5-year position with clauses Elaine hadn't mentioned during dinner. There's a non-compete preventing international policy work for 2 years after leaving, Alexis noted, scrolling through with increasing concern, and a publicity clause requiring Cooper family approval for any public statements or publications. More troubling was the housing stipend, seemingly generous until the fine print revealed it applied only to residences within specific Seattle neighborhoods near the Cooper estate. Financial incentives strategically designed to keep Alexis geographically and professionally tethered to her parents' influence. "They drafted this without consulting me," she said, voice hardening with realization. "Mom presented it as collaborative development, but this was prepared before our dinner conversation." The manufactured illusion of choice, a tactic I recognized from my security work analyzing social engineering attacks, had backfired through overreach. The contract's restrictions were too explicit to disguise as benevolent guidance. "What do you want to do?" I asked, giving Alexis space to process this betrayal at her own pace. She closed her laptop decisively. "Accept the UN position, set clear boundaries with my parents, start making decisions based on what we want, not what they expect." The determination in her voice signaled a fundamental shift, not rejection of her parents, but recognition of manipulation that required response. For the first time since our wedding, I felt we were truly united against external pressure on our marriage. That night, Alexis crafted a careful email declining the foundation position while expressing appreciation for the opportunity. Her diplomatic wording maintained respect while establishing clear boundaries. After sending it, she turned to me with newfound clarity. "They're going to push back," she predicted. "Hard." "Probably," I agreed, "but we'll handle it together." She nodded, a mixture of sadness and resolve in her expression. "I've spent my entire life trying to meet their expectations while pretending I was making independent choices. I don't want to live like that anymore." This moment of authentic self-awareness felt like a breakthrough, not just for Alexis personally, but for our marriage. Whatever challenges the Coopers presented next, we would face them as partners with aligned understanding of the dynamics at play. Alexis's decision to accept the UN position marked a turning point in our battle against her parents' manipulation. The moment she sent her formal acceptance letter, something shifted in her demeanor, a quiet confidence replacing the hesitation that had characterized her interactions with her family. For the first time since our wedding, I saw her standing firmly in her own power rather than reacting to external expectations. The Cooper response was swift and multifaceted. Elaine called first, her carefully modulated voice barely concealing her displeasure. "The Foundation Board is extremely disappointed, Alexis. They invested considerably in developing your department with the understanding you'd provide continuity." The implication was clear. Loyalty had been betrayed, obligations unfulfilled. Alexis handled the conversation with remarkable composure. "I appreciate everything the Foundation has done for my career development. This opportunity allows me to apply that experience on a global scale, which benefits everyone involved." Her professional tone gave Elaine little emotional leverage to exploit. Richard's approach was more direct, a lunch invitation for Alexis alone at his downtown club. "Your mother is upset, but I'm concerned about practical matters," he explained when she recounted the conversation later. "International consulting creates lifestyle complications, housing instability, tax implications, retirement planning disruptions." He'd presented a meticulous analysis of financial risks while conveniently ignoring the career advantages. "Did he mention our marriage at all?" I asked, already anticipating the answer. "Of course," Alexis confirmed. "He suggested extensive travel creates relationship stress and that successful marriages require consistent proximity during formative years." She rolled her eyes, "As though we're specimens in a scientific experiment rather than adults who've thoughtfully considered our options." This growing awareness of her parents' tactics was encouraging, but their campaign was just beginning. A week later, Clayton called Alexis directly, ostensibly to discuss Foundation transition details, but quickly pivoting to personal matters. "I've accepted a visiting professorship at Oxford for next semester," he mentioned casually. "Global security law seminars could coincide with your European UN assignments if schedules aligned." The strategic positioning was transparent, creating potential coincidental encounters in distant locations away from my presence. Most concerning was the family dinner that followed. Alexis and I arrived at the Cooper estate to find not just her parents, but her extended family, cousins, her brother Marcus and his wife Vanessa, elderly aunts with significant social standing. Elaine had manufactured an audience of respected family members to witness what amounted to an intervention. "We're all so concerned about this impulsive decision," Elaine began once dinner was served, glancing meaningfully around the table. "International consulting isn't a career. It's a temporary assignment that damages long-term prospects." Richard nodded solemnly. The Foundation position offered stability, community connection, proper compensation structure. These external roles lack security, particularly when considering family planning timelines. The reference to family planning ignited something in Alexis I'd never seen before, a steel-spined resolve that silenced the table. "Ryan and I make our family planning decisions privately," she stated firmly. "My career choices reflect professional goals I've held since graduate school. They aren't impulsive, they're deliberate steps toward meaningful impact." Her grandmother, a formidable woman whose approval Elaine clearly coveted, studied Alexis thoughtfully. "The UN Development Program has exceptional reputation. Eleanor Roosevelt helped establish their human rights frameworks. This unexpected support from a family matriarch visibly unsettled Elaine, whose strategy depended on unified family pressure." The dinner continued with alternating waves of manipulation and resistance, Elaine orchestrating concerned comments from various relatives, Alexis responding with increasing confidence. I contributed sparingly, recognizing this was primarily Alexis's battle to fight, though I provided consistent support when family members attempted to isolate her position. That night, driving home through Seattle's rain-slicked streets, Alexis seemed simultaneously exhausted and energized. "I've never contradicted them like that before," she admitted, "especially not publicly, with the whole family present." "How does it feel?" I asked. She considered this seriously. "Terrifying, liberating, like I've been holding my breath for years, and finally allowed myself to exhale." She reached for my hand across the console. "Thank you for giving me space to find my voice." "Your voice was always there," I reminded her. "You just needed to trust it more than you feared their disapproval." This moment of genuine connection reinforced what we were fighting for, not just against her parents' manipulation, but for our right to define our relationship and lives according to our own values. The battle wasn't merely defensive, but affirmative, creating space for authentic partnership rather than externally imposed expectations. The following weeks brought escalating tactics from the Coopers. Richard leveraged professional connections to raise questions about the UN position's funding stability. Elaine orchestrated a series of coincidental encounters between Alexis and Clayton at professional events. Most troubling was their attempt to create financial dependency, suddenly expressing concerns about Alexis's student loan refinancing that they had previously offered to assist with, suggesting the international relocation might necessitate reconsidering family financial arrangements. Throughout this intensifying campaign, I maintained strategic restraint. The USB evidence remained unshared, a last resort rather than an opening gambit. Instead, I focused on strengthening our partnership and supporting Alexis's growing recognition. of manipulative patterns without forcing premature confrontation that might trigger defensive loyalty. This measured approach was tested when Elaine escalated dramatically. Learning that Alexis had begun selling furniture in preparation for our more mobile lifestyle, she arrived unannounced at our condo with an appraiser. "Since you're divesting possessions, I thought we should document values for insurance purposes," she explained with transparent insincerity. "Some pieces have family significance." The boundary violation was breathtaking. Without invitation, she began directing the appraiser toward items throughout our home, particularly focusing on wedding gifts from Cooper family friends. "These should be properly catalogued since they were presented to both of you," she noted pointedly, "in case circumstances change." The implication was unmistakable. She was preparing for our marriage to fail, documenting assets as though divorce was inevitable. The psychological tactic was as sophisticated as it was cruel, creating anticipatory tension, manufacturing evidence of relationship instability, planting seeds of doubt about marital permanence. Alexis, previously making progress in recognizing manipulation, momentarily faltered in the face of this aggressive maneuver. "Mum's always been detail-oriented about family possessions," she rationalized weakly after they departed. "It's probably just her way of processing the changes." "Alexis," I began carefully, "your mother brought a professional appraiser to document our belongings while making thinly veiled references to potential separation. That's not detail-oriented. It's deliberately destabilizing." She paced our increasingly empty living room, conflict visible in her expression. What possible motivation would she have for wanting our marriage to fail? That doesn't make sense. The moment had arrived for more direct truth. I retrieved the USB drive from my office safe, connecting it to our television. "I think it's time you saw something," I said gently. For the next hour, we reviewed selected footage and evidence, the wedding vow tampering captured on my boutonniere camera, the altered marriage license, audio from recent family gatherings where her parents discussed their concerns about Alexis, making impulsive decisions under influence when they thought we couldn't hear. Most damning was an email chain I'd obtained through a security audit of my company's systems, discovering that Richard had commissioned a background investigation into my business finances, seeking vulnerabilities or improprieties that could be leveraged. The investigation had found nothing actionable, but the intent was clear: gathering ammunition to force separation if more subtle methods failed. Alexis watched in stunned silence, color draining from her face as evidence accumulated. When the final video ended, Elaine coaching Clayton on maintaining appropriate professional contact during Alexis's temporary international assignment, she turned to me with tears streaming down her face. "How long have you known?" she whispered. "I suspected manipulation from the beginning," I admitted, "but I only started gathering concrete evidence after the wedding vow incident. I didn't show you immediately because I wanted to respect your relationship with your parents without forcing you to choose sides prematurely." She nodded slowly, processing this information. "They've always been controlling, but this is—" She gestured helplessly at the screen. "This is pathological." "It's about control," I confirmed gently. "Your happiness matters to them only if it aligns with their vision of what your life should be. Any deviation threatens that control." For several days following this revelation, Alexis withdrew into quiet reflection. I gave her space while remaining supportive, recognizing she was grieving the relationship she thought she had with her parents while reconciling it with reality. When she finally emerged from this introspection, her perspective had fundamentally shifted. "I need to confront them," she stated with calm determination over breakfast. "Not accusatory or emotional, but clear and direct. They need to understand that manipulating my life and undermining my marriage won't be tolerated." "Are you sure?" I asked, concerned about potential backlash. They're likely to deny everything and turn accusations back on us. I'm sure, she replied firmly. Avoiding confrontation hasn't worked. Neither has hoping they'll respect boundaries they don't acknowledge exist. The only path forward is honest communication with consequences for continued interference. Her clarity was inspiring, not angry or vindictive, but resolute in her commitment to authentic relationship on healthy terms. We agreed on a strategic approach, requesting a private meeting at neutral location, presenting selected evidence matter-of-factly rather than emotionally, and clearly articulating boundaries with specific consequences for violations. The confrontation occurred at a private room in an upscale downtown restaurant. Elaine and Richard arrived with the confident demeanor of people accustomed to controlling social dynamics. Their expressions shifted noticeably when Alexis opened her laptop and connected it to the room's display screen. Before we begin discussing the UN position and our upcoming changes, she stated calmly, there are some matters that need addressing. Without further preamble, she played selected clips from the wedding day, including Elaine altering our vows and Richard discussing strategy to guide Alexis back to appropriate choices at the reception. The effect was immediate, Richard's composed facade cracking slightly, while Elaine's expression hardened into defensive anger. "Why were you recording private family moments?" she demanded, attempting to shift focus from their actions to our response. "Because I recognized a pattern of manipulation that threatened my marriage," I replied evenly. "Washington may be a two-party consent state for recordings, but wedding venues are public spaces with no expectation of privacy, particularly for document handling." Alexis maintained remarkable composure. "I'm not interested in debating legal technicalities. The question is why you felt entitled to alter our wedding vows, interfere with my career, and continuously undermine my relationship." Richard adopted a conciliatory tone. "You're misinterpreting parental concern as interference, Alexis. Everything we've done has been motivated by love and experience. Altering legal documents and orchestrating professional sabotage isn't love," she countered firmly. "It's control disguised as concern, and it stops today." What followed was one of the most remarkable conversations I've ever witnessed. For nearly 2 hours, Alexis methodically addressed years of manipulation tactics, connecting current behaviors to childhood patterns I hadn't been aware of. Academic choices redirected, friendships subtly undermined, career guidance that consistently prioritized parental accessibility over personal passion. Throughout her presentation, her parents attempted various defensive maneuvers: denial, minimization, emotional appeals, guilt induction, authority assertion. Alexis countered each tactic with calm clarity, neither escalating emotionally nor retreating from uncomfortable truths. "Here's what happens moving forward," she concluded finally. "Ryan and I are proceeding with our plans. I'll begin UN consulting next month. Our relationship with you depends entirely on your respect for our boundaries and decisions." Elaine, frustrated by her inability to regain control of the conversation, attempted a final emotional manipulation. "After everything we've sacrificed for you, this is how you repay our devotion? By choosing this arrangement over family loyalty. That's precisely the false choice you've consistently presented," Alexis replied, unmoved. "You define loyalty as compliance with your preferences rather than support for my authentic choices. Real family devotion means respecting autonomy, not demanding submission." Richard, recognizing the futility of their position given the concrete evidence, shifted to damage control. "Perhaps we've been overzealous in our guidance," he conceded carefully. "We only want what's best for you." What's best for me is the freedom to determine my own path with my husband, Alexis stated firmly. Your role going forward can be supportive or absent. That choice is yours, but manipulation will no longer be tolerated. As we left the restaurant, I sensed a fundamental shift in the family power dynamic. For the first time, Alexis had claimed her authority as an independent adult rather than a compliant daughter. The confrontation hadn't been about winning an argument, but establishing a precedent, demonstrating that manipulation would be recognized, named, and rejected. The immediate aftermath brought predictable retaliation. Elaine initiated a campaign of concerned calls to extended family, presenting herself as the wounded mother whose daughter had fallen under negative influence. Richard leveraged professional connections to raise questions about the UN position's credibility. Several family friends suddenly became unavailable for previously planned gatherings. Rather than engaging with these tactics, we focused on preparing for our transition. Alexis completed her foundation responsibilities with impeccable professionalism, despite Clayton's increasingly transparent attempts to create divisions between us. We sold excess possessions, arranged for storage of sentimental items, and leased our condo to trusted colleagues during our initial European assignment. The Cooper family response to these concrete actions evolved from active sabotage to resigned recognition. 2 weeks before our departure, Richard contacted Alexis directly, requesting a private conversation, father and daughter only. She agreed with the stipulation that she would record the meeting for transparency. Surprisingly, he accepted this condition. They met at a small cafe near her foundation office. According to the recording she shared with me later, Richard's approach had shifted dramatically. "Your mother and I have discussed your concerns at length," he began with uncharacteristic humility. "While we may not fully agree with your characterization of our intentions, we recognize that our methods have damaged our relationship." "That's an understatement," Alexis replied, guardedly accepting his opening but not rushing to easy reconciliation. "Your independence has always been challenging for us," he continued with surprising candor. "The Cooper family has operated with certain expectations for generations. Deviation creates discomfort. Discomfort doesn't justify manipulation," she noted firmly. "No, it doesn't," he acknowledged, another surprising concession. "Your confrontation forced difficult reflections about our behavior patterns. I cannot speak for your mother's evolving perspective, but I recognize that continuing our current approach will only ensure your permanent estrangement." This pragmatic assessment reflected Richard's analytical nature. Recognition that their current strategy was failing to achieve desired outcomes, requiring tactical adjustment rather than true acceptance. Nevertheless, it represented progress from outright sabotage to strategic accommodation. "What are you proposing?" Alexis asked directly. "A reset," he replied carefully. "Not immediate trust, which would be unrealistic, but space for new patterns. You pursue your international role without interference. We suspend judgment and expectations while establishing healthier communication." The conversation continued with specific commitments. Richard would ensure Clayton's professional contact ceased immediately. Family financial entanglements would be addressed transparently. Communication would occur directly between adults rather than through extended family proxies. When Alexis shared this recording with me that evening, I remained cautiously optimistic. "It's progress," I acknowledged, though motivated more by fear of losing access to you than genuine recognition of their behavior's toxicity. She nodded thoughtfully. "I don't expect profound personality transformation, but strategic accommodation creates space for incremental improvement. They're recognizing that their old methods no longer work, which forces behavioral change, even if fundamental perspectives remain unaltered. Her maturity in approaching this complex family dynamic impressed me deeply, neither naively trusting superficial concessions nor rejecting possibility of measured improvement. She wasn't demanding perfect parents, just baseline respect for her autonomy and relationship choices. This measured approach was tested days later when Elaine requested similar one-on-one conversation. Unlike Richard's pragmatic adjustment, Elaine's emotional framework made acceptance of boundary enforcement more challenging. The meeting began with attempted guilt induction. "I haven't slept properly since your accusations," before shifting to selective rewriting of history. "I've only ever wanted you to have advantages I lacked." Alexis maintained consistent boundaries throughout, neither engaging with emotional manipulation nor allowing conversation to drift from specific behaviors to abstract intentions. "My boundaries aren't punishment, Mom," she explained with remarkable patience. "They're necessary protection for my well-being and relationship." By conversation's end, Elaine hadn't reached Richard's level of tactical accommodation, but she recognized that previous approaches had become counterproductive. "I don't understand why you're choosing this path," she admitted with rare candor, "but continued opposition clearly isn't bringing you back into the family's established patterns." This represented significant progress, not endorsement or support, but suspension of active interference. For now, that created sufficient space for our transition without constant defensive maneuvering. Our departure date approached with mixed emotions. Alexis had secured a prestigious initial assignment with the UN Development Programme's European Division, focusing on refugee integration policy, work that genuinely excited her professional passions while creating meaningful global impact. My company had established remote operations capabilities that would allow me to maintain client relationships while developing European connections, potentially expanding our security consulting internationally. The Cooper family maintained cautious distance during our final preparations, neither actively supportive nor overtly interfering. Only Marcus and Vanessa offered genuine enthusiasm, helping with practical logistics while expressing admiration for Alexis's professional opportunity and our partnership's resilience. The night before our flight to Geneva, we received an unexpected delivery, a package from Richard containing family documents Alexis had long requested access to but been denied. Her grandmother's unpublished academic papers on international human rights frameworks, historical correspondence with diplomatic figures, research materials from groundbreaking advocacy work. Attached was a simple note: "These belong with the family member most capable of extending their significance. Safe travels." This gesture, while modest compared to the manipulation we'd endured, represented meaningful acknowledgement of Alexis's authentic path rather than the one they'd prescribed. It wasn't reconciliation exactly, but recognition that controlling behavior had failed to achieve desired outcomes, necessitating new approaches to maintaining family connection. As we boarded our international flight the following evening, Alexis gazed thoughtfully at the Seattle skyline receding beneath us. "I always thought independence meant emotional detachment," she reflected quietly. "Now I understand it's about authentic attachment on healthy terms, choosing connection from strength rather than compliance from fear." The insight resonated deeply. Our battle against her parents' manipulation had never been about severing family ties, but transforming their nature, replacing control with respect, expectation with acceptance, obligation with choice. The journey ahead would bring professional challenges and opportunities, but our partnership had been forged in adversity that tested and ultimately strengthened our commitment to mutual support and authentic connection. Later, as Alexis slept beside me somewhere over the Atlantic, I reviewed our journey from wedding day sabotage to international departure. The USB drive with its damning evidence had served its purpose, not as a weapon of accusation, but as a mirror reflecting painful reality that could no longer be denied or rationalized. Armed with truth and mutual support, we had established boundaries that would protect our marriage from external manipulation while creating space for healthier family dynamics to potentially develop over time. The Cooper family story wasn't finished. Reconciliation remained uncertain, dependent on their willingness to respect boundaries and acknowledge inappropriate behavior patterns. But our story had decisively shifted from reactive defense against manipulation to proactive creation of the life we envisioned together, defined by our values rather than external expectations. As dawn broke over European airspace, I contemplated the lessons of our experience. Protecting relationships from external interference requires vigilance, evidence-based confrontation of manipulation, consistent boundary enforcement, and unwavering mutual support. More importantly, it demands courage to face uncomfortable truths about family dynamics while maintaining compassion for the complex motivations driving controlling behavior. Our victory wasn't in defeating her parents or severing connections, but in transforming the foundation of our relationship with them, replacing compliance with authentic engagement, obligation with choice, fear with strength. Whatever challenges awaited in our international adventure, we faced them as genuine partners who had discovered our greatest power lay not in fighting external control, but in creating something stronger, a partnership built on mutual respect, authentic support, and unwavering commitment to each other's growth and fulfillment. 3 years have passed since Alexis and I boarded that flight to Geneva, beginning our international journey with uncertainty but unwavering commitment to each other. Those years have transformed us both professionally and personally in ways we could never have anticipated when fleeing the suffocating control of the Cooper family dynasty. Alexis thrived at the UN Development Programme, her expertise in international refugee policy earning recognition from global leaders. What began as a consulting position evolved into directorship of a specialized task force addressing displaced population integration across European borders. Her innovative frameworks, combining legal protection with cultural preservation strategies, have become standard practice in multiple countries, saving countless lives while preserving dignity for vulnerable communities. My cybersecurity firm expanded beyond expectations, establishing European operations that secured contracts with international organizations and government entities previously beyond our reach. The perspective gained from global exposure transformed our security protocols, incorporating diverse approaches to digital protection that American-centric thinking had overlooked. What the Coopers had framed as career-limiting wanderlust became the catalyst for unprecedented professional growth for both of us. More significant than external achievements, however, was the internal transformation our relationship underwent. Once freed from constant manipulation, without the pressure of navigating Cooper family dynamics, our partnership flourished in an atmosphere of genuine support and mutual respect. We discovered deeper levels of communication, stronger commitment to shared values and resilience that could only emerge when tested by real-world challenges rather than manufactured family drama. Looking back, I realize now that the USB drive containing evidence of wedding sabotage represented more than just documentation of manipulation. It became a symbol of our commitment to truth over comforting illusions, to authentic connection over superficial harmony, to partnership based on mutual growth rather than external expectations. That small digital record of betrayal ultimately sparked the courageous conversations that freed us from patterns that would have slowly suffocated our relationship. Our journey toward reconciliation with the Cooper family has been complex and non-linear, marked by periodic regression into old patterns followed by incremental progress toward healthier dynamics. Richard adapted more readily than Elaine, his pragmatic nature eventually recognizing that maintaining connection with his daughter required accepting her autonomy rather than attempting to control her choices. Elaine's evolution proved more challenging, her identity so intertwined with managing family affairs that Alexis's independence represented personal failure rather than successful parenting. The turning point came unexpectedly during our second year abroad. Alexis had been selected to present her refugee integration framework at a prestigious international conference in London. Without notifying her parents, I arranged for them to receive invitations through professional channels Richard would recognize as significant. The gesture was calculated risk, offering opportunity for pride in their daughter's accomplishments, without requiring her emotional vulnerability or reinstating their control. To our surprise, they accepted. Watching Richard and Elaine observe Alexis commanding the stage before audience of global policy experts, confident, articulate, respected, for her expertise rather than family connections, triggered visible recalibration in their perception. For perhaps the first time, they witnessed their daughter's capabilities without filtering her success through expectations they had imposed. Richard approached afterward with genuine pride, remarking that her presentation skills reflected true Cooper quality without attempting to claim credit for her accomplishments. Elaine's response proved more revealing. "I always imagined you achieving prominence through the foundation," she admitted during careful dinner conversation. "I couldn't envision success taking different form than what I'd planned." This rare moment of self-awareness, while limited, acknowledged the fundamental issue that had driven her manipulation: inability to separate her daughter's identity and fulfillment from her own carefully constructed vision. The relationship began healing through professional respect before personal reconnection could develop. Richard initiated occasional email exchanges about international legal developments relevant to Alexis's work. Elaine forwarded articles about European cultural events without accompanying commentary about our eventual return to responsible Seattle life. These small gestures, devoid of manipulation tactics, allowed tentative rebuilding of communication channels without emotional pressure. 6 months after the London conference, we faced significant professional decision. Alexis had been offered permanent diplomatic position with expanded responsibilities, requiring relocation to Brussels and commitment to international development as career path rather than temporary assignment. My company had opportunity to establish European headquarters, formalizing our global presence with potential partnerships throughout the EU. These options would cement our international trajectory, effectively closing the door on Cooper family expectations of our eventual return to their controlled environment. Before finalizing these decisions, Alexis suggested unprecedented step, inviting her parents to visit our Geneva apartment for candid discussion about our future plans. The invitation represented extraordinary trust given their history of manipulation, yet reflected her growing confidence that maintaining relationship with her parents no longer threatened her autonomy or our partnership. Their arrival revealed physical changes reflecting their emotional adjustment, Richard appearing slightly older, less commanding in his bearing, Elaine more subdued in both dress and demeanor than her previous meticulously constructed image of maternal authority. They entered our home as guests rather than inspectors, accepting refreshments without commentary on our temporary furnishings or European habits. The conversation that followed demonstrated genuine evolution in family dynamics. Alexis presented our professional opportunities with confidence, neither seeking approval nor anticipating sabotage. Richard asked thoughtful questions about diplomatic protocols and security considerations without suggesting alternative paths. Most surprisingly, Elaine listened more than she spoke, her expression reflecting internal recalibration rather than strategic planning. "You've built remarkable lives here," Richard acknowledged finally, glancing around our apartment with its stunning view of Lake Geneva. "Different than we envisioned, but undeniably successful. Success isn't measured by adherence to predetermined paths," I observed carefully. "It's found in creating lives that align with our values and capabilities." Elaine's response surprised us both. "I've been consulting with someone," she admitted, discomfort evident in her uncharacteristic hesitation. "A therapist. After London, I realized my approach to family relationships wasn't producing desired outcomes." The clinical framing was pure Elaine, yet the underlying acknowledgement represented seismic shift in her self-perception. "Mom," Alexis began, genuine emotion coloring her voice. "That's necessary," Elaine interrupted firmly. "Your confrontation 3 years ago was painful but accurate. My need for control damaged our relationship and nearly destroyed your marriage. I'm not claiming transformation, merely recognition and effort toward change." This moment of authentic vulnerability, Elaine Cooper acknowledging personal limitation without strategic purpose, created opening for genuine conversation that extended late into the night. Not perfect reconciliation or complete understanding, but foundation for potential relationship based on reality rather than manipulation and compliance. Before departing, Richard presented unexpected gift: legal documents transferring Alexis's trust fund to her direct control, removing conditions previously attached to Cooper family financial support. "Your life belongs to you," he stated simply. "Your achievements have earned unqualified respect, not contingent support." While this gesture acknowledged her independence, more meaningful was Elaine's parting comment, delivered without performative emotion or hidden agenda. "I'm learning to separate my expectations from your choices. It's difficult work, but necessary for having any relationship with the remarkable woman you've become." The visit marked turning point in Cooper family dynamics, not fairy tale transformation or instant healing, but committed beginning to healthier patterns. Subsequent interactions have reflected continued effort toward respectful boundaries, though occasional relapses into controlling behavior still require firm correction. The relationship remains work in progress, with mutual recognition that trust damaged through years of manipulation requires consistent repair through changed behavior rather than verbal assurances. 2 months ago, we faced our most significant test of these evolving dynamics when Alexis discovered she was pregnant with our first child. The news brought immeasurable joy coupled with practical considerations about integrating parenthood with our international careers. More challenging was determining how to navigate grandparent relationships, given the Cooper family history of control and manipulation. After careful discussion, we invited Richard and Elaine to Brussels, where we'd established our permanent home, following Alexis's diplomatic appointment. Rather than sharing our news immediately, we spent several days observing their behavior, assessing whether boundary respect demonstrated during recent interactions would survive such significant family development. When we finally shared our news over dinner at our favorite local restaurant, their reactions revealed genuine progress. Instead of launching into predetermined grandparenting plans or questioning our parenting capabilities, they simply expressed joy and asked thoughtful questions about Alexis's health and our preliminary thoughts on work-life integration. "We would welcome your involvement in our child's life," Alexis stated directly, once initial excitement settled, with clear understanding that parenting decisions belong exclusively to us, without manipulation or undermining. Richard nodded, immediately his expression solemn. Your boundaries are not just understood, but respected. We've learned difficult lessons about the cost of control. Elaine's response required visible effort, but demonstrated genuine progress. My therapy has focused significantly on anticipated grandparenthood, she admitted with uncharacteristic transparency. I recognize my tendencies toward over-involvement and have developed specific strategies for respecting your authority as parents. This measured response, acknowledging potential challenges while committing to different patterns, reflected meaningful evolution rather than strategic compliance. The conversation that followed established explicit expectations about visits, communication, and decision-making that would govern grandparent relationships without sacrificing our parental autonomy. Most revealing was discussion about child-rearing philosophy that emerged organically during their visit. When Alexis described our intention to raise multilingual children comfortable with international mobility, Elaine visibly restrained her instinctive response before offering measured perspective. While I initially envisioned Cooper grandchildren, in Seattle educational systems, I recognized the exceptional advantages of multicultural upbringing. My preferences shouldn't limit your children's opportunities. This ability to acknowledge personal preferences while respecting our decisions represented profound shift from previous patterns where Cooper family expectations were presented as objective reality rather than subjective preference. The visit concluded with tentative plans for their return near the baby's arrival, with explicit agreement about boundaries and expectations governing their involvement. Yesterday marked 1-year anniversary of our confrontation with the evidence contained on that USB drive. As Alexis and I walked through Brussels Grand Place, her pregnancy now visible beneath her coat, she reflected on our journey with characteristic insight. I used to believe family loyalty meant sacrificing authenticity, she observed, watching sunset illuminate the ornate guild halls surrounding the square. Now I understand true family connection requires honoring each other's authentic selves, rather than imposing predetermined expectations. Her words captured the essential lesson of our experience, that genuine relationships must be built on acceptance of who people actually are, rather than who we wish them to be. The Cooper family dynamic is healing not because Elaine and Richard finally accepted me as worthy son-in-law, but because they're learning to see Alexis as autonomous individual, rather than extension of family identity and ambition. The USB drive that documented wedding sabotage still exists, secured in our home safe alongside other important records. Its purpose has transformed from potential weapon to historical document, reminder of where we began and how far we've traveled. We don't review its contents anymore, finding greater value in creating new memories than revisiting past manipulation. Yet its presence reminds us that protecting our partnership sometimes requires uncomfortable confrontation with painful truths, rather than comfortable accommodation of damaging behavior. As we prepare for parenthood, we're developing what Alexis calls conscious family culture, intentional patterns of communication, boundaries and connection designed to support individual growth within loving relationships. We're determined that our child will experience family as source of strength and acceptance, rather than control and conditional approval. This commitment doesn't guarantee perfect parenting, but establishes foundation based on respect for personhood that the Cooper family dynamic historically lacked. Most importantly, we've recognized that overcoming external manipulation strengthened our marriage in ways that might otherwise have taken decades to develop. Facing Cooper family interference united us in shared purpose, accelerated our communication skills, and clarified our commitment to supporting each other's authentic development. What began as defensive protection evolved into proactive partnership, characterized by deep trust and genuine admiration. The attempted sabotage that began our marriage ultimately failed, not because we escaped physical proximity to the Cooper family influence, but because we developed internal solidarity that external manipulation couldn't penetrate. Geographic. Distance provided necessary space for establishing healthy patterns, but our ultimate protection came through commitment to authentic partnership rather than compliance with external expectations. Last week, small package arrived from Seattle, carefully wrapped gift from Elaine containing family heirloom that had belonged to Alexis's grandmother, the independent-minded academic whose feminist principles had shaped Alexis's worldview despite her mother's attempts to minimize that influence. The accompanying note reflected Elaine's continued evolution. For your daughter, from her great-grandmother, who never compromised her principles. May she inherit your courage rather than my caution. This acknowledgement that courage to pursue authentic path represents greater legacy than cautious adherence to social expectations, demonstrated profound shift in Elaine's perspective. Not complete transformation or perfect understanding, but meaningful growth toward healthier relationship based on acceptance rather than control. As we move forward into parenthood and continued professional growth, we carry important wisdom gained through our journey. True relationship security comes not from controlling circumstances, but from consistent commitment to shared values and mutual support. External manipulation only succeeds when internal connection falters. Partnership built on authentic acceptance creates resilience that no outside interference can undermine. The ultimate lesson of our experience transcends specific family dynamics or wedding day sabotage. We've learned that relationships requiring sacrifice of authenticity inevitably collapse under their own contradictions. Genuine connection must honor rather than suppress individual truth. Lasting partnerships flourish through mutual growth rather than restrictive expectations. The USB drive that captured evidence of wedding sabotage served essential purpose in breaking patterns of denial and manipulation. Its greater value, however, emerged through the courageous conversations it inspired, honest communications that transformed superficial harmony based on compliance into authentic connection founded on mutual respect and genuine acceptance. 3 years ago, standing in that church, while discovering my mother-in-law's attempt to rewrite our vows, I couldn't have imagined the journey ahead. What began as defensive evidence gathering evolved into catalyst for profound personal and relational transformation. The path hasn't been easy or straightforward, but facing difficult truths ultimately freed us from patterns that would have slowly suffocated our authentic partnership. As we await our daughter's arrival in Brussels, far from the controlling influence that nearly derailed our beginning, we're grateful not just for physical distance, but for emotional clarity that allows us to establish relationship with the Cooper family on healthier terms. The grandparents our daughter will know aren't perfect, but they're evolving, learning, however imperfectly, to respect boundaries and honor choices different from their expectations. The sabotage that threatened our wedding became unexpected. Gift, forcing early confrontation with damaging patterns that might otherwise have undermined our marriage through years of subtle erosion. By facing manipulation directly, with evidence that couldn't be denied or rationalized, we established precedent for truth-telling that continues strengthening our partnership through each new challenge and opportunity. Tonight, as Alexis and I finalize plans for the nursery in our Brussels apartment, the USB drive remains securely stored away, silent testament to where our journey began, but no longer defining force in our relationship with her family. Its purpose fulfilled, it serves now as historical artifact rather than active tool, reminder that protecting what matters sometimes requires documenting difficult truths, but building what matters demands moving beyond grievances toward possibility of new patterns and healthier connections. Our daughter will be born into family, still healing from generational patterns of control, still learning to balance connection with autonomy, still practicing communication based on authentic acceptance rather than strategic manipulation. The journey isn't finished, may never be completely resolved, but the direction is firmly established. She will inherit not perfect family dynamics, but committed effort toward relationships that honor individual truth while nurturing loving connection. And perhaps that's the most valuable legacy we can offer. Not flawless resolution, but persistent commitment to creating family bonds based on respect rather than control, acceptance rather than expectation, truth rather than comfortable illusion. The USB drive that documented wedding sabotage ultimately sparked transformation more meaningful than perfect ceremony ever could have provided. Journey toward authentic relationship that continues enriching our lives with each passing day. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.